All right. The last and hope maybe least controversial, but it's still going to be a little controversial topics we want to talk about was also political, but more directly connected to AI, robotics, and labor markets and the economy. Yaniv, you had this meta trend you wanted to talk about. We do this every now and then on the show. One of us observes this kind of like meta trend and we want to share it with the audience and get people to send us some feedback. You've identified something to do with immigration and robotics. So set it up for us and let's dive
Well,
in.
it's a sort of a thought exercise of a forecasting thought exercise, Chris. So like we've just had two very fractious elections in the UK and France. We obviously have the US election coming up. What has been happening, especially in Europe and the US, is this greater and greater focus on immigration, right? And I think what you would say, and I guess what I'd say is I'm not taking a political position here. I'm making a political observation that there are more and more people in countries that are large immigrant destinations who are becoming uncomfortable with the level of immigration, with the fact that they feel, let's say, less at home in their home country than perhaps they used to. And this is affecting politics in a major way. Now, if you really think about immigration, it comes into three buckets, Chris, right? There is high-skilled migration, which is about saying we want to import the best and the brightest to help grow our economy and make our country more powerful. There is humanitarian immigration, which is basically refugees saying, we have a responsibility to take in people who have had difficult lives. And then there is low-skilled immigration. And it's the low-skilled immigration that I wanted to talk about, really. Low-skilled immigration is basically saying, this has been true since, say, mid-last century, where wealthy Western countries have had labor shortages, and they have solved those labor shortages by bringing in immigrants, right? And that trend is not changing. In fact, we continue to have declining birth rates in basically every developed economy, and that means that labor shortages become an ongoing issue, right? And I think there's been this interesting thing, right, where for quite a long time, I think if you polled the population, they would say, there is too much immigration. We're not anti-immigrant. We would like a bit less immigration. But then the government, whichever government is in power from both sides of politics, will always allow in a lot of immigrants because it is so important to keep the economy going, right? And there's this weird tension between the government and the people who voted them in. What I am seeing is a potential for a shift in that dynamic, where with the increasing power and affordability of automation solutions, including in the physical world, so I'm talking about robotics in the broad sense, the ability for fewer people to get more stuff done, I feel like this nexus between economic growth and migration in low birth rate countries is kind of broken. And so what I'm expecting to see over the next decade or two is a lot more governments really standing on a platform of, but then actually enacting low immigration rates. And I think that's going to be a pretty seismic shift in, the way the world works, and will have other weird second order effects. But I just wanted to put that out there and, for debate and for steel manning, because I think it's an interesting thing that's coming that I just haven't seen discussed at all.
Yeah, you're right. I haven't seen anybody talk about this. To my mind, it's a really interesting additional vector of society level disruption that is possible despite any kind of alignment, AI safety nonsense, because this is not a bug, it's a feature, right? AI replaces cognitive labor and large swaths of white collar work, and embodied AI, robotics, will replace large forms of blue collar labor and low skilled labor, as you've mentioned. Not only will that put a bunch of people out of work who are citizens or immigrants of a country, existing immigrants of a country, it's going to put a lot of pressure on immigration policy and intake. You're 100% right. Yeah, I don't know what to say about it except to say this is just one of the many ways that there's going to be a kind of society level shocks, supply shocks, demand shocks, culture shocks. Now, let's maybe talk about some other flow on effects from that. So why do people immigrate? They immigrate for opportunity. Well, if a country is experiencing a cratering of their economy because of automation and AI, I mean, there's maybe less opportunity in the US, for example, to immigrate to. So maybe they don't want to immigrate, right? There isn't any opportunity there to immigrate to. Maybe there is an increase in abundance. So services, food, labor becomes cheaper in the home country, in the origin country. And so those who may be low skilled, lower on the socioeconomic totem pole, have less reason to immigrate because their homes are actually, there are more services at lower costs. but still they don't have a job. And so, who's going to pay for these services if they don't even have any job of their own? And so it's hard to predict, does immigration even need to continue because there isn't that kind of unbalanced economic opportunity? Maybe these rich companies are the first to adopt AI, and so the opportunity diminishes or evaporates in rich countries, but third world or up-and-coming emerging economies are not able to adopt AI as quickly, so there's more labor needed there. It's tough to see how the sloshing of the bucket, right? If you think of the world as this like giant bucket of labor and money and resources and wealth is sloshing around, right? And it's hard to see where the new water level is and where the water settles, because there's so many interacting systems and subsystems and human psychology involved. But yeah, this is I think a great point to make, and it intersects with even the political rhetoric in the US about immigration and building a wall and all this kind of stuff. And so, yeah, it's going to change the dynamic dramatically.
I think it's just maybe one of the many second order effects, right? When we talk about second order effects, when you have like a social change, that's the main first order effect. We say, well, robotics. But then all the second order effects are what things happen because we now have widespread robotics. And I think this is one of them that will be really interesting to see. And I think it's also a little bit of a dangerous one, Chris, because it further sort of silos the world. So we'll see what happens.
There is this kind of meta trend happening of this balkanization of countries. We're all withdrawing into our nation states. And then there is this balkanization of people. We're all withdrawing into our own algorithms and our own tribes. I've mentioned on the show many times, I wrote this think piece some 10 years ago about what I called unbundling and this hyper-personalization at runtime. At the time and now, I wasn't judging it to be good or bad, just an observation. But it's clear there have been negative externalities, and right now I can't imagine seeing it getting better in the short term. And so, yeah, it's definitely an acceleration of this kind of unbundling. These countries will draw into themselves, and yeah, we'll see what happens. All right, that's our thoughts on how robotics and AI might affect immigration. What do you think? Will it disrupt immigration policy? Will it have no effect? Or will emerging economies actually become more interesting, and might less immigration actually occur? Join us in the comments and we'll join you down there.